thank you very much. Well, Patrick, you said it all, so I'm done. It's really a pleasure being with you, not only because I'm with you, and I have met a very interesting group of people, thank you for that and for inviting me, but because I'm in Sarajevo, and it's one of the 2-3 places where really I feel home in this world. And it's a difficult presentation for me, first of all, because at this time in the morning, normally I don't speak. And secondly, because, well, after what we have seen yesterday in the Genocide Museum and the Srebrenica Gallery, I really have the impression everything I will say is totally futile and pointless. But I'll do my best and present what I have prepared. I'll try and give you a presentation of what UNESCO does in the field of culture and what heritage is to UNESCO, linking that to heritage interpretation, and I'll try and give some few comments from my personal experience about engaging with diversity in heritage work from the point of view of an international civil servant. So, perhaps, yeah, okay. So this is the outline. What do we speak about when we speak about heritage in UNESCO? This will be the first 1 and 2 points. And in the final part, I will briefly speak about some global tools for global challenges that we have developed in the sense of contents and materials on global issues that are related to heritage interpretation somehow. And some of these tools, like Education for Sustainable Development, are already built in your concepts and work. So the introduction to UNESCO. Can you find UNESCO here? No, UNESCO is here. Well, here we are. So, just to show you the complexity of the UN framework, we are part of the specialized agencies. What we have of special is not only the mandate, but is that we are autonomous organizations with respect to the UN. We have our own governing bodies, we have our own member states that are not necessarily the same as the UN in general. There is actually one very significant difference in that sense. So this status of being an autonomous organization brings along a lot of implications in the sense of politicization and how we are very closely related to our member states. Somehow it's even too close. So our current Director General, Ms. Azoulay from France, we have 193 member states, the governing bodies composed of member states representatives, the Secretariat, so people like me, international civil servants, headquarters in Paris, plus a network of 53 and counting field offices, including one in Europe, which is the office for which I am working, based in Venice. We have a mandate on science and culture and a specific core area in our geographical mandate, which is Southeast Europe. We have liaison offices in Geneva and Brussels, but they are liaison offices, one with the EU and one with the UN agencies based in Geneva, besides, of course, headquarters in Paris. This is our presence in Paris, in Europe. So the mission and objectives. This is very important because, of course, everything that I will say is related to that, and even interpretation of heritage is, if framed in the context of UNESCO activities, must be related to that. So the mission: contribute to the building of peace, the eradication of poverty, sustainable development, and intercultural dialogue through our work in 5 different sectors. Education, which is the first and biggest sector. UNESCO is always identified with cultural heritage, but actually cultural heritage is a part of what we do in culture, which is a part of what we do in 5 different sectors. So we have the natural sciences, social and human sciences, communication and information, and culture. And each of the 5 sectors have overarching objectives, and the one for culture is fostering cultural diversity, intercultural dialogue, and a culture of peace. So again, you have diversity here, you have dialogue, you have peace, also in specific to what we do in the field of culture. The functions, we are a laboratory of ideas. We are the place where the international community at the level of states meet to discuss on common challenges, priorities, and on the way ahead, what to do together to tackle these challenges and those priorities. We foster international cooperation. We set norms and standards. This is specifically important for culture because the work of UNESCO in the field of culture is almost entirely based on legal standards, legal instruments, such as the conventions. And then we work to develop awareness, to develop capacities, and to improve policies at international and also at country level. So heritage in UNESCO designations. UNESCO has a network of many different designations, many different programs, and in some cases conventions that have in their operational dimension lists of designations. World Heritage is one, is the most renowned one, but we have many others. This is just a sample of them. We have a Creative Cities network. We have in the education sector a global network of learning cities. In culture we have another famous list, which is the representative list for intangible cultural heritage. Then we have the natural sciences designations, the Man and Biosphere reserves, and the global geoparks, and so on. So it's a complementary set of tools, of course. They all have different focuses, but they're also partly overlapping. You have so-called multi-designated sites. You have areas that have many different designations. World Heritage and at the same time a Biosphere Reserve, or you have intangible cultural heritage elements within the territory comprised by a World Heritage inscription. So what is heritage to UNESCO is many different things. For each convention, for each program that we have to box, to frame heritage in a given definition, to define the scope of action of that convention or that program. So we have different boxes for heritage. We have a definition of heritage in the World Heritage Convention. We have a definition for heritage in the Intangible Cultural Heritage Convention, which actually is not a definition of heritage. It is a definition of the scope of action of the convention. This convention will apply to this kind of heritage. So the first issue here with diversity is also for heritage interpreters to understand the diversity of heritage, not only at local level in a specific given context, but in general. There are many different forms of heritage, and each one of them will require also specific knowledge and understanding of the subject if you want to communicate it and to have people interpreting it in a better way. This is a very important issue for us. So we have definitions for World Heritage, for intangible cultural heritage, for geological heritage, when it comes to global geoparks, and all those forms of heritage are characterized by diversity. Why is heritage so important to UNESCO? Because it's a pillar of cultural diversity. Cultural diversity is expressed through heritage and through contemporary forms of expression. The diversity of cultural expressions as expressed by arts, cultural and creative industries, or contemporary forms of cultural expressions. And it's as important to humanity as biological diversity is. That's the underlying concept. The normative system of standards approved within the framework of UNESCO in the field of culture. We have six main conventions, where heritage is one. 5 of them are related to cultural heritage. One of them, the most recent one, the 2005 convention, is related to the diversity of cultural expressions intended as contemporary cultural expressions. So what is expressed nowadays through cultural forms in any possible way. And it's about protecting the entire cycle of the conceptualization, production, dissemination, enjoyment, and access to cultural expressions. Then we have World Heritage, of course. I will go through 2 of them in my presentation. I will speak about the World Heritage Convention and intangible cultural heritage. But we also work on underwater heritage, We have the 1954, the first convention approved in UNESCO in the field of heritage about protecting cultural heritage in the event of armed conflict, and also a very important convention, which is the one on the fight against the illicit trafficking of cultural property, but these are a bit out of our subject. So the World Heritage Convention, it's about protecting natural and cultural properties of outstanding universal value. Outstanding universal value is the buzzword in World Heritage. World Heritage is based on this concept. So World Heritage is a system of interpreting heritage that looks at special values that make one site more important than others. There is this value implication in World Heritage. Sites that for some reasons, according to some criteria, are exceptionally important, therefore are more important than others, and should be especially protected. By whom? First of all, by the member states. That's the main spirit of the convention, to engage and commit member states to protect cultural heritage in their territories, with possibly the assistance of the international community. So member states and state parties working with each other, respecting cultural heritage in their respective territories. And of course then there is the role of the international community when it comes to facilitating cooperation and all what I have said about the mission of UNESCO and our functions. So the key objectives are, besides conservation, are also to reinforce the appreciation, the protection and the transmission of this heritage to future generations. As I've said, it starts with a definition. I'm not going to read it, but basically it's about places. The word heritage is about places. Cultural heritage, buildings, groups of buildings, sites, and natural heritage. Natural heritage, places of special natural importance. So it's about places. Then we have a list of 10 criteria. 6 are the cultural criteria. So criteria to define outstanding universal value in cultural sites, and 4 natural criteria. Before that. Criteria to define outstanding universal value in natural sites. In order to meet the necessary condition to be recognized as World Heritage, a site must meet at least one of these 10 criteria, but you have cases such as Venice, in which you have all the 6 criteria of the culture criteria that are met by the property. Authenticity and integrity are specific to cultural heritage sites. We do not apply those categories to natural heritage. Cultural heritage sites, besides meeting one of the 6 criteria, must respect the criteria of authenticity and integrity. Basically, to make it very short, authenticity is about quality. So is the property really what its given statement of significance claims it to be? Integrity is about quantity, how much is left of that heritage to be recognized and interpreted and to have the outstanding universal value effectively expressed. Is there enough left and included of the property so that we can understand and appreciate its importance? Natural criteria. So Article 4. So you must have heard of sites protected by UNESCO. Now, this is not really an appropriate definition. UNESCO cannot enforce protection anywhere. And we don't have the mandate, we don't have the authority to do that. The convention is based on this article. The duty of ensuring the identification, protection, conservation, presentation. This is a first connection to the subject of the conference here. And transmission to future generation of cultural and natural heritage situated in its territory belongs primarily to that state. That's the sense of the World Heritage Convention, again, to commit state parties to protect cultural heritage in their territories. How? Article 5 gives a list of duties of the state parties. And I have highlighted those that are very relevant to heritage interpretation, because besides the conservation, we have the imperative of facilitating the presentation of heritage. This was drafted in 1972. So, presentation of heritage was the concept adopted at that time to indicate that set of activities that have to do with communicating what heritage is and having it understood and appreciated. Then you have, of course, other kinds of duties. This is something quite important to me, is my favorite article in the entire convention. State parties have to adopt a general policy which aims to give cultural and natural heritage a function in the life of the community, and to integrate the protection of that heritage into comprehensive planning programs. In these 3 lines, we have all conventions that came after, and even the Faro Convention is here. It's about this. It's about giving heritage a function in the life of the communities. It's about integrating heritage into broader planning programs and broader contexts. So what is the outstanding universal value? The outstanding universal value is the reason why a site is inscribed, the special importance of a site that makes it so important as to be inscribed in the World Heritage List. And it's expressed by a statement, so by a definition. It's conventional, you know. In the document that accompany the inscription of a site, you have a definition of why that site is important. That's already an interpretation per se. You have the values of the site, you have the attributes that carry the values, and those attributes and values are interpreted and framed into a written statement. And that is the benchmark, that is the baseline, according to which conservation and management of the site will be then evaluated. You have to ensure that the outstanding universal value as expressed in this statement is protected, conserved, and possibly enhanced. So you have a conventional definition as the baseline for all what is related to the management of a World Heritage Site. And since the early 2000s, management is part of the statement of outstanding universal value. Before that time, there was no requirement to have a management system in place for World Heritage Sites. Now it's a requirement. Also for inscription, there must be a management system or plan, depending on definitions, already as part of the nomination file. So management is a part of the outstanding universal value. There can be no outstanding universal value recognized internationally if there is not a management system in place to conserve and enhance this value. And the management plan must include presentation of heritage. So, what we can understand from all this is that of course, presentation of heritage, as defined by the convention, can help developing a shared understanding of the sites by all stakeholders. This is not to be given for granted, that even at local level, before we think of visitors, you do not always have the same understanding of a site, what the values of the site are, and for those for whom those values apply. Different groups and different community groups may have different understandings of the values of a site. So the first important work that there is there to do when developing a management system through heritage presentation is ensuring that all stakeholders at site level have a common understanding of the site. Again, it's not to be given for granted. It's not always easy. This should include also the intangible dimension, so the intangible heritage values that are associated to the tangible values. World heritage is about tangible heritage, but tangible heritage can have intangible values associated to it. Historical values, cultural values associated to buildings and places. They have to be considered in the understanding of the site, in the presentation of the site, in the management of the site. Finally, management systems should deliver a constructive role for cultural heritage in fostering a learning environment. And again, these apply to local communities, to visitors, to different age groups, not only schools, but also lifelong learning. A cultural heritage site is a learning environment. It's a place in which you can not only experience heritage, but experience it in a way to have a personal growth, an intellectual growth, to learn something. A And now for something completely different. Intangible cultural heritage. The success of the World Heritage Convention somehow brought along the necessity to rethink heritage at international level, because cultural heritage intended by World Heritage is about places, I've said. What about different forms of cultural heritage expression? Cultures that have expressed their cultural heritage through intangible forms. All this led, through a long process and discussion, to the approval of a new instrument, the Convention for the Protection of, for the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage, approved in 2003. Definition. I will read this because it's less known than World Heritage. That's the first part. What is that about? Practices, representations, expressions, knowledge, skills, and even instruments, objects, and artifacts associated therewith that communities, groups, and in some cases individuals recognize as part of their cultural heritage. It's a very dense definition. First of all, you have the scope of application, knowledge, traditional knowledge and practices, to summarize. But then you have this part, which is of key importance, that communities, groups, and in some cases individuals recognize as part of the heritage. So who has the role and the authority to define and identify heritage in the first place? The communities, those who express the heritage. It's up to them to say what is important to them, what is part of their cultural heritage. It's not up to the experts. It's not as in built heritage, in which you have art historians and architects and other experts that decide what is heritage and what not. This is totally inverted. It's bottom-up. Easy to say, not easy to do. It requires specific understanding and knowledge and also interpretation skills. So a set of, which is not exclusive, of possible forms in which this intangible heritage is expressed: oral traditions, performing arts, social practices, craftsmanship, traditional of course, and others. Similarly to World Heritage, we have duties of state parties. First of all, identify and define various elements in their territories, with the community participation, of course, and take the necessary measures to ensure the safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage present in their territory. These are the two main duties of the state parties: identification and safeguarding. Safeguarding, what it means, a system that ensures the viability, the transmission of this intangible cultural heritage to future generations. And it can comprise different activities, including identification, documentation, research, preservation, promotion, enhancement, transmission, especially through formal and non-formal education. All of this, I think, is especially relevant to heritage interpretation. So we have lists. This was an inspiration taken from the World Heritage. We also have lists associated to the intangible cultural heritage, but they are different lists. First of all, they are different in the sense that it's not the same list, which is not always understood or conveyed by the media, for example. And then they work according to different principles. ICH is traditional, is contemporary, is living, is community-based, is inclusive, is not necessarily place-based. It can be, but not necessarily. All of those values are somehow reflected in the specificity of the list, which is called representative. It doesn't concern about special places of special importance. Elements in the list are elements that represent the concept of intangible cultural heritage, are representative of that, are not more important than others. The convention is about safeguarding intangible cultural heritage in its entirety, regardless whether it is inscribed in a UNESCO or in a different list. That doesn't matter to the convention. I don't have time to go through this, but it would be interesting perhaps for the next meeting to elaborate a bit further on what the differences and specificities are for World Heritage and intangible cultural heritage, or in general, tangible and intangible. Now, we have designations in the field, in the sector of natural sciences. There are designations related to natural resources. There are designations related to heritage, different forms of heritage, natural heritage especially. The first one, because it was created earlier, it's the network of the Biosphere reserves, which is part of the Man and the Biosphere program. And Boris yesterday, he spoke a bit about that, so I'll also be short. Basically, the Biosphere reserves are areas comprising different ecosystems that promote the combination, the reconciliation between natural conservation and sustainable development through the involvement of local communities. In their work, as part of their functions, they also have this objective of being learning environments again, being places in which sustainable development is practiced sustainably through the use of natural resources, also in a way to convey values and have an influence, a transformative impact on attitudes and behaviors. Very similar to this, UNESCO global geoparks, with a specificity that they are based on areas with a special geological significance. Similarly, in the principle to what I've said for intangible cultural heritage, the global geopark is a totally bottom-up functioning system. The definition of the areas must be done with a participatory and comprehensive approach involving all different stakeholders. The objectives of the network are very similar to Biosphere reserves. So they are single unified areas of a special international geological significance. They are to be managed with a holistic approach combining protection, education, again we have a special role for education, and sustainable development, and they should promote the recognition and management of heritage. How do you promote the recognition? Of course, this has to do a lot with heritage, communication and interpretation. Now, all these tools are different. They refer to different programs, different conventions, different places, different countries, but all these things have something in common. First of all, they are part of what UNESCO does. They are related to UNESCO. Therefore, they have shared objectives, which are the objectives of the organization, and they should contribute to the same mission of the organization, which is contribute to fostering peace and sustainable development. So, in the management of our heritage, in the safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage, in the management of biosphere reserves, heritage managing authorities shouldn't not only look at how to tackle local issues and ensure the proper management, but also at how to possibly enhance the contribution of those sites to these objectives. They are the flag bearers of UNESCO's values. And this can be done also through shared approaches. Shared approaches related to awareness raising, to inclusive and participatory management, community engagement, stress on education, and sustainability. Well, that's you. Heritage interpretation. I wanted to put a slide of that to remind again the educational activity, the role of meanings and relationship, the first-hand experience, all things that are very closely related to the raison d'etre of the UNESCO designated sites to come to this point. Ideally, heritage presentation at UNESCO heritage designated sites, regardless of the different lists, should engage, in my opinion, this is my elaboration, with multiple levels of interpretation. Of course, you will have to start from the site values. If you have a World Heritage Site, you have to communicate the outstanding universal value of that site as your core action. Why that site is so important, what are the values and the attributes that are carrying those values. But then you have to contextualize the site. That site doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in a social, cultural, economic, environmental context, the broader site context, which has values, and those values have to be communicated and interpreted. Then you have the related UNESCO designation. How that site and how heritage interpretation at that site can help conveying the objectives, informing different audiences about the different UNESCO designations. If I go to a World Heritage site, I should not only learn about that site, but also about World Heritage. What is World Heritage? Why is that important to everybody? This is another level of interpretation. Then you have the outmost level, which is UNESCO's mission and global values. Again, designated sites are flag bearers of UNESCO's missions and values. And there should be a way to convey those values through heritage interpretation as well. Starting from the site values and going up to this broader, more global level of values and meanings. Now, briefly, all what we do, of course, is framed in what is happening in the world, not only related to global challenges, but also to global responses to global challenges, what the international community is doing. And this is now the reference, the agenda, the common global agenda on sustainable development, the Agenda 2030, and the Sustainable Development Goals. So when I was speaking of sustainable development, it should be now interpreted within this framework. Sustainable development as defined by the 2030 Agenda, and fostering sustainable development means to us contributing to the achievement of sustainable development goals. Two goals, actually two targets, are especially important in this sense, but this is not exclusive. 11.4, which is about protecting the worlds without capital W. It's not the World Heritage. It's just the cultural and natural heritage of the world in general. And then you have target 4.7, quality education, which is also about education for sustainable development. These are, I think, especially important targets related to heritage interpretation. But heritage safeguarding contributes to other sustainable development goals related to economic growth, related to gender equality, related to environmental sustainability, to global peace and security. Many. Again, cultural diversity and biodiversity is threatened by all this. I think I don't need to go through. We are all very much aware of the global challenges that we are facing. One of the responses that was given within the framework of UNESCO to these global challenges in the education sector is to develop the so-called education for sustainable development approach and related contents and materials and methodologies. So, education for sustainable development is intended to empower learners of all ages to take informed decisions and responsible action. There's always a transformative approach. It's about action for environmental integrity, economic viability, and a just society for present and future generations. It's holistic, it's transformational, and it contributes to lifelong learning. Perhaps there's no need for me to say how much this is important to heritage interpretation. Some especially important concepts also that are part of the approach. The learning content, integrating critical issues, what we were discussing yesterday about these disturbing questions. It's basically the same. It's integrating critical issues in the ESD approach. For example, climate change, biodiversity, disaster risk reduction, sustainable consumption, but also diversity, engaging with diversity is surely a critical issue that should be tackled by education for sustainable development. Then there are methodologies, approaches, pedagogy and learning environments. The societal transformation, again, the transformative approach, which is about empowering learners. It's not about only raising awareness. I'm not only aware, I am empowered to do something with what I have learned. and the learning outcomes, stimulating further learning, instilling curiosity, promoting core competencies, and so forth. We are the lead agency, okay, but that's not so much important who's leading and who's not. Another tool, global citizenship education, is closely related to education for sustainable development with a slightly different approach. It works by empowering learners of all ages to understand the global issues, again instilling values, again the attitudes and behaviors that support global citizenship, and we have here a more clear focus on what kind of values are we talking about. Creativity, innovation, commitment to peace, human rights, and sustainable development. So it's also about values. It's not only about sustainability in general, but what values are important to sustain and underpin sustainability. And then again you have the three domains of learning: cognitive, socio-emotional, and behavioral. I'll skip this part to come towards the conclusions. So heritage interpretation aims at developing the same competencies basically as global citizenship, education, and sustainable development: critical and creative thinking, communication, leadership, initiative taking, social responsibility. I see really a very strong common ground in that sense. Not only, but there are common methodologies, because what we have seen, although very briefly, resounds very much with the methodologies that you apply in heritage interpretation. First-hand experience combined with narrative tools. It's about non-formal education. It's about comprehensive approaches for all age groups. And it's about value-based transformative learning. So, a first conclusion may be that UNESCO heritage designation support heritage safeguarding and promotion embodying UNESCO's mission and values. Flag bearers, as I've said. UNESCO designated sites are flag bearers of those values underlying the designations. Therefore, heritage interpretation in the framework of UNESCO designated sites should combine the presentation of site values with the basic principles underlying the designations, but also the broader values of UNESCO and the UN in general. Moreover, heritage interpretation can contribute to education for sustainable development, global citizenship education, preventing violent extremism through education, intercultural and interreligious dialogues, and other global issues, which in turn, through their methodologies and experiences and approaches, can contribute, I think, effectively to heritage interpretation. This is the presentation. If I have a couple of minutes, I'll give you a couple of comments of my personal experience about engaging with diversity and cultural heritage diversity. First of all, as an international civil servant, what we have to do is to learn and listen. Listening is the starting point. And it's not enough to listen to one source and to one person. You have to listen to as many as possible. And keep in mind that each one of them will be biased. Each one of them, even the most genuine and sincere, they will all have a bias. It's important to be open-minded and to understand what are the different interpretations before working on interpretation for others. You have to interpret for yourself. The second is, when we work on complex environments with a lot of diversity, but also a lot of different interpretations and political influences and conflicts, is to focus on what we have in common, of course, and not what is different. Not what divides, but what unites. And there's always something that we have in common. And even when it is difficult to find it, in the end we are all human beings. We should be enough. Third, heritage is an asset, is not a liability, is not a cost, or not only. This is very effective in working in difficult environments. When you manage to convey this message, to have heritage approach and understood as a resource for the community, not something that we have to pay for the conservation of. But it's also something that can help us growing, not only economically, but to foster social cohesion, to help people living better together, to drive also sustainable economic growth. Why not? It's legitimate. But you have to get this message through. Heritage is a resource, is an asset, is not a liability. Fourth, to engage with stakeholders and to have stakeholders engaging among themselves, to have them working together, to have them listening to each other, again about listening, to have them exchanging views and approaches, because in the end they will find a common ground to work on cultural heritage together, considering the different starting points and the different points of view that they may have about it. It's a very difficult process in many cases, but it's something that you can't avoid if you want to achieve sustainable results. This is all. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.